This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During Cybersecurity Awareness Month, LifeLock wants to give you helpful tips to protect your identity. Using multi-factor authentication can be a line of defense to help protect your personal information, like getting a text with a security code. But LifeLock offers comprehensive protection against identity theft. Protect your identity today with a 30-day free trial at lifelock.com/podcast.
Making everyone happy on vacation isn't easy, but you know what is? Going to Aruba. All you have to do is walk out your door to find pristine pools, relaxing white sand beaches, and an island teeming with outdoor activities that'll put a smile on any face. You won't just feel great, you'll all feel great, filled with a calmer, more peaceful vibe that radiates Aruba's warmth. And the best part is, it never fades. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your family trip at Aruba.com.
Max Bankman, I'm the new doctor.
Welcome aboard the Odyssey.
ABC Thursdays.
This ship is heaven. We're tending to our passengers' dreams.
I'm in.
From 911 executive producer Ryan Murphy comes a splashy new drama on a luxury cruise ship with Joshua Jackson and Don Johnson.
It's your job to keep everyone alive.
She's in VFib. 1, 2, 3. Clear.
I have a pulse.
You're going to be okay.
Dr. Odyssey. Thursdays, 9/8 Central on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. A special shout out to the newest patron, Jerry, who signed up at the gold level. I appreciate your support. It ensures the Red Treehouse will continue for many more months and years to come. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Let's start with a few questions. Is it possible to make a pact with the devil and open a doorway from the spiritual world to the physical? And by making a pact, can a person become possessed by an evil spirit? Skeptics say, of course not. For them, demonic possession is no more a reality than unicorns or Bigfoot. They point to other, more rational explanations: mental health or psychological struggles, medical conditions, and more. On the other side, believers say it's possible. For them, demonic possession is as much a reality as anything else in the material world. To date, we've explored at least 8 cases of suspected demonic possession, each scary in their own ways. At the risk of hyperbole, I think today's episode may be the scariest. It certainly is the darkest and arguably the most disturbing. And while it does have some of the hallmarks of demonic possession, superhuman strength, and speaking in a strange language, there are a few details that make this case unique, because it includes bilocation, doppelgangers, and more. It includes some of the most disturbing details we've covered on the Red Treehouse. So let me offer a content warning. This episode includes descriptions of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, discussions of physical assault, murder, and suicide. Listener discretion is advised. Most of the details come from Satan's Harvest, a book co-authored by Maurice Theriault and Ed and Lorraine Warren. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the dark, disturbing, and terrifying possession and exorcisms of Maurice Theriault. Did his pact with the devil lead to demonic possession? Or were his erratic and violent behaviors caused by something else entirely? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During Cybersecurity Awareness Month, LifeLock wants to give you helpful tips to protect your identity. Using multi-factor authentication can be a line of defense to help protect your personal information, like getting a text with a security code. But LifeLock offers comprehensive protection against identity theft. Protect your identity today with a 30-day free trial at lifelock.com/podcast.
Maurice Theriault was born in 1936 in Van Buren, Maine, to parents Philippe and Alice Theriault. Details about Maurice's early childhood are scarce. However, it is widely accepted that he had a difficult childhood and was abused by his father. The family worked on a farm, and Maurice missed significant time from school to work the fields, especially during planting and harvesting season. This had a severe impact on Maurice's academic performance, and it was reported he was only in the 3rd grade at age 13. For much of his early life, Maurice's father emotionally and physically abused him, and would often resort to physical assault whenever Maurice did something wrong or didn't follow directions. When he was 10 years old, Maurice witnessed something so awful he never fully disclosed the details. One day, in 1946, he walked over to the barn and discovered his father doing something horrific. Terrified by what he saw, Maurice attempted to back away slowly without being seen, but in the process, knocked over a garden tool, which gave away his presence to his father. Because Maurice never fully provided details of the incident, some speculate he discovered his father in, quote, some kind of deviant sexual act, end quote. As if this weren't horrifying enough, Maurice's father ordered him to participate in the act and threatened to kill him and bury him in the manure pit if he refused or told anyone. The incident had a profound and tragic impact on Maurice for the rest of his life, and though he didn't fully understand what was going on, he felt something evil had taken place. For years, Maurice was forced to participate in these acts whenever his father demanded. He kept his secret for 3 years. Maurice's relationship with his mother was different than his relationship with his father. Where Philippe was abusive and seemingly had no affection for his son, Alice was Maurice's safe person. He developed a strong bond with her and took comfort in her attempts to shield him from his father's abuse. By the time he became a teenager, Alice recognized a dramatic shift in Maurice, and she knew that her 13-year-old son was troubled. One day, while in the kitchen, Maurice encouraged his mother to go out to the barn so that she might discover what his father was doing. Rather than press him for details, Alice followed through on his suggestion and was promptly berated and beaten for it. In the ensuing chaos, Maurice overheard his father scream, "I'm going to kill you someday, woman. I swear I'm going to kill you someday." After Philippe threatened Maurice, he beat him with a belt. To that point, Maurice was a devout Catholic who, quote, relied on his faith to get him through the hard days on the farm, end quote. He was convinced, at least for a time, that Jesus would save him from the ongoing suffering he and his mother endured at the hands of his father. Yet, despite his fervent prayers, the abuse continued. One day, while in the field with his father, Maurice had trouble starting the tractor. His father became enraged at Maurice and pushed him off the tractor onto the ground, where he hit his head against a boulder. A deep gash opened up on his forehead, and Maurice slowly got up off the ground and used his t-shirt to try and slow the bleeding. He walked, dazed and unsteady, back to the house, while his father continued on the tractor, with no regard for Maurice's well-being. As he watched his father ride off into the sunset, Maurice made a stunning pact. "I'd rather work for the devil than work for you." He said it over and over again until he reached the house. For the next 5 years, Maurice worked the farm, counting down the days until his 18th birthday. On July 13, 1954, Maurice turned 18 years old, and he began to enact the plan to leave his parents' home. He attempted to enlist in the army. After completing the paperwork and passing the physical exam, Maurice walked home and told his parents the news. Philippe Theriault didn't take it well. In fact, the next day, he drove into town, and after returning a few hours later, handed Maurice a piece of paper with a number and letters stamped across the top, 4F, which, quote, means that a person is not fit for military service due to physical, mental, or moral reasons, end quote. Somehow, Maurice's father convinced the army doctor to disqualify his son from service. 3 years later, on his 21st birthday, Maurice packed his belongings and told his mother he was leaving to work in a factory in Connecticut. After kissing his mother goodbye, he started to walk out the door. And as he did, quote, he looked over his shoulder at his father's chair one last time and said, "I swear I hate you, you bastard. Curse you. I hope the devil takes his pitchfork and sticks it in your heart." End quote. For the first time in his life, Maurice was free, and he spent several months working in Connecticut before returning to Maine and reuniting with his childhood friend, Christine Harper. The relationship between the two moved quickly, and within a short time they eloped and moved to Massachusetts soon after that. Over the next few years, The couple had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. All seemed to be going well, until one night when Maurice and Christine got into an argument over house chores. Maurice was frustrated over the home's disarray, while Christine was frustrated over Maurice's lack of consideration for her taking care of the children. As the two argued, Christine looked over at the wall and gasped. The crucifix hanging on the wall was dripping blood. The two immediately began praying, and when they looked up again, the crucifix was back to normal. A few days later, on the heels of another argument, Maurice stormed towards the back bedroom, where he saw the crucifix, once again, bleeding. And again, the two immediately prayed, and when they looked up, the crucifix was back to normal. A year later, Maurice and Christine divorced. A few months after the two separated, Christine was hospitalized after falling ill with pneumonia. Maurice was worried about Christine and agonized over not being able to take off work and visit her. Instead, he went to see his mother. When she opened the door, Maurice Theriault was shocked to see her son standing there, because she'd just gotten off the phone with Christine, who reported Maurice had just left her hospital room. Maurice claimed he'd felt as if he'd visited Christine in a dream, stating, quote, "How could I have just been in Baltimore and be here with you now? It's impossible." End quote. It was the first time Maurice Theriault would bilocate, which is defined as, quote, the ability of a person or object to be in two places at the same time. It is considered a psychic or miraculous ability. End quote. 5 years later, Maurice, who now went by the nickname Frenchie, met a woman named Erica who worked with him in the potato fields. Within a short time, the two were married and remained so for 9 years. Maurice never shared his strange experiences with Erica, though she experienced a few herself. In 1965, while working on the farm, Maurice stumbled over a wooden cross lying in one of the fields. As he bent down to pick it up, his vision blurred. When he rubbed them, he felt liquid on his fingers, and when he pulled them away, he saw they were covered in blood. Thinking he'd cut himself, Maurice ran to the house to clean up. Except the blood kept coming. It was seeping from both eyes. No matter what he did, he couldn't stop the flow. Seeing him rush into the bathroom, Erica knocked on the door to check on Maurice. When she did, Maurice came out of his stupor and noticed dried blood on his face and shirt. The blood flowing from his eyes stopped. He changed and told her he'd cut himself shaving. One night, while returning home from a party, Maurice and Erica were nearly killed when he fell into a stupor and almost hit a tree. After coming out of the trance, Maurice reported having no memory of being at the party, driving home, or almost hitting the tree. By now, Erica was growing weary of Maurice's strange behavior, including the time their pet beagle Peter was found dead. Maurice claimed the dog had run into the road and was hit by a car. Except Erica found Maurice's bloody pickaxe, where he'd claimed the accident occurred. There was also the time she watched as Maurice beat his riding horse, Barcoda, with a stick. When she confronted Maurice about this, He claimed he would never hit the horse. Except Erica had seen it with her own 2 eyes. Weary of Maurice's erratic behavior, Erica finally had enough and left him and moved to Maine. In 1979, Maurice was working on his uncle's farm and doing side work on a farm run by Simon Juneau. One night, while the two were drinking beer and bourbon, Simon asked Maurice to take his daughter Nancy to work, as her car was in the repair shop. He was glad to do this, as he found Nancy attractive. The two grew close and eventually began a romantic relationship, which Nancy wanted to take slowly. Eventually, they moved to East Longmeadow, just south of Springfield, Massachusetts. For a time, things went well, and the farm they lived on grew prosperous. Maurice's parents lived a short 15 miles away, and though Maurice had always been close with his mother, his relationship with his father suddenly became more cordial. As Maurice and Nancy's finances stabilized, they sought to buy additional property and visited a farm in Warren, Massachusetts. As they were standing on the front porch of the property, Nancy took out her cross that she'd always worn around her neck and told Maurice, "Let's ask Jesus to help us decide." This seemingly benign comment set off a fire inside Maurice. Eyes wide, he used both hands to push Nancy off the porch. Then, while she was on the ground, he jumped on top of her and grabbed the chain from her neck and threw it into the woods. Then, as if nothing happened, Maurice calmly climbed back onto the porch and mumbled to himself, "I have her by the hand. I have her by the hand." When questioned about it, Maurice claimed he didn't remember the incident at all. The next day, Maurice reached into his pocket and gave Nancy the cross he'd thrown into the woods. When asked how he found it, Maurice stated, quote, "I didn't find it. A lady found the cross, a lady in white. She took me by the hand and led me to where this cross was. I don't even remember where, but she showed me right where it was." End quote. Nancy asked who the lady was, and was horrified by Maurice's answer. Quote, "I didn't get a good look at her face, but I think it was your mother." End quote. Here's the thing. Nancy's mother died 15 years before. Despite these strange occurrences, the couple purchased the farm. Within a short time, Philippe told Maurice and Nancy he and Alice were moving to Oklahoma. Though upset, Maurice tried his best to stay in contact with her. One night, in June 1982, as Maurice and Nancy were getting ready for bed, they heard something strange coming from somewhere in the house. Nancy asked Maurice to look around. He did, but found nothing. After getting into bed, they heard the strange sounds again. Quote, "Maurice, there's definitely somebody down there. In fact, I hear two voices, a man and a woman. It's like they're arguing." End quote. Once again, Maurice went downstairs to look around, and once again, he found nothing. The two climbed back into bed and quickly fell asleep. Sometime later that night, the two were startled from sleep by a pounding on the front door. Maurice ran down the stairs and opened the door, where a police officer was standing. The officer told Maurice to call his sister Lucy in Oklahoma. There'd been an accident. Maurice called his sister, and when his brother-in-law picked up, was told his parents were dead. They'd both been shot. Years ago, Philippe Theriault threatened to kill Alice when she discovered him in the barn. That night, in June 1982, he made good on his threat, shooting Alice in the right side of the head before shooting himself in the chest. Racked with grief, Maurice eventually fell asleep, where he had a terrifying dream. In it, Maurice claimed to have a first-person view of the incident, as if he were seeing through Alice's eyes. Maurice recounted seeing his father kneeling on the edge of the bed, looking down at his mother who was on the ground. The scene is described as follows. Quote, "It was a Philippe she had never seen, not even in his wildest rages. His brow was so swollen that it was ape-like, and his lips were drawn back over his teeth, giving his jaw the look of a muzzle. His eyes were black, like two bottomless holes." End quote. When Alice spoke to Philippe, he responded in a voice not his own. Quote, "We are not Philippe. We are old buddies of Philippe." End quote. When asked who they were, he responded with a bunch of names, including Baal, Moloch, Melkon, Belial, Beelzebub, Leviathan, Lucifer, and Satan, and stated, quote, "Recognize us now? We're the devil." End quote. When asked what was going to happen to her, Philippe responded to Alice, quote, "We are going to kill you. Then we are going to kill this disgusting worm that we have used for so many years. Don't you think that will be a fitting conclusion to all the years we've tortured you and your family? We've even tortured him. Yes, we've even tortured this worm. So now his time is over. We're going to kill you, and then we're going to kill the worm. The police will come and rule it a murder-suicide. What else could it be? The police don't believe in us, which is very inconvenient indeed for us. After that, we will go and pay a visit to your dear son Maurice." End quote. Alice started to pray the Lord's Prayer, but before she could finish, she heard the first gunshot. It missed and hit the headboard behind her. Almost immediately, she felt the second shot hit her in the right temple. Philippe then turned the gun on himself. Maurice was devastated, as he now had to live without his mother. In 1983, the strange incidences escalated, especially after Nancy's two daughters moved into the farmhouse. On New Year's Day, there was a snowstorm. Maurice and Nancy were sitting in the living room when he got up to make a cup of coffee. A few minutes later, Nancy called out to him but got no response. She figured he'd gone into the bedroom, except when she looked in, he wasn't there. Suddenly, she smelled something awful, like rotting potatoes. She called out to her daughter to look around for Maurice, except she too could not find him. Concerned, Nancy opened the front door and called out to him into the snowstorm, but got no response. A second or two later, Nancy saw Maurice peek out from behind the barn door and wave to her. As he walked from the barn back up to the house, Nancy noticed there was only one set of footprints, those made by Maurice as he walked back up. There were no footprints going from the house to the barn. She asked him about it, and he seemed confused. Maurice claimed he'd been in the barn the entire day. which made no sense to Nancy, since she'd just seen him in the living room. After shaking the snow off, Maurice walked towards the kitchen. A split second later, Maurice walked out of the kitchen, holding a cup of hot coffee, which again made no sense, because it was impossible for him to have boiled water or brewed coffee in a matter of just a second. She walked up to him and noticed he wasn't cold, which he should have been, having just come in from out of the snow. When questioned about this, Maurice looked at her confused and commented, "Yeah, it's supposed to be a bad storm." One night, Maurice woke up in the middle of the night and startled Nancy awake. As he moved out of bed, she noticed something odd on his back. It was some kind of writing. Maurice quickly looked in the mirror and discovered 4 words in French. "The door is open." After this, Nancy began keeping track of these strange occurrences. In a small book which she hid under the bed. In 1984, Maurice asked to see the book, but was shocked to discover it was burned. Everything she'd written was burned away. Maurice claims he didn't burn the book. But almost immediately, Nancy insists he go see Father Beardsley at the local Catholic church. The priest meets with Maurice and is convinced something spiritual is occurring. And after the visit, the strange occurrences pick up. Multiple fires start seemingly out of nowhere, including one which burned their shed to the ground. A few weeks later, Maurice's tomato stand catches fire. And then, a strange and unknown fire broke out in Nancy's daughter's bedroom. As the couple prepared to decorate for Christmas that year, Maurice made, quote, "a 6-foot wooden cross that he planned to mount on the roof facing the street," end quote. As he climbed the ladder, he felt it twisting as if someone were trying to make him fall. Except when he looked, no one was there. The twisting continued, and he inevitably lost his balance and fell to the ground. Maurice climbed back up the ladder and was able to successfully nail the cross to the roof. Except when he was done, the ladder twisted and tipped over and he fell. And this time, the Christmas lights were wrapped around his neck. He'd claimed they'd tightened around his neck by unseen hands. A short time later, Maurice and Nancy returned to visit Father Beardsley and pleaded with him for help. Nancy recalled another scary incident where Maurice was seemingly in 2 places at once. She recalled seeing Maurice come out of the hallway while she, her brother, and his wife were at the kitchen table. Her brother asks Maurice where he's going, but Maurice doesn't answer. Instead, he walks out the door, quote, "like he was a robot or something," end quote. And here's the thing. Maurice walked out of the house completely naked. Sensing something was wrong, Nancy asked her daughter to go into the bedroom and see if Maurice was still there. So she does. And he is. Quote, "He's sitting on the edge of the bed, taking his boots off. Blood is seeping from his eyes." End quote. Father Beardsley listens intently, and upon hanging up the phone call, reaches out to Ed and Lorraine Warren. On February 18, 1985, the Warrens arrived at Maurice and Nancy's home, where they found him sitting at the table in a trance-like state. As Nancy tells them of the strange occurrences, Maurice's eyes, once again, begin to bleed. He then tells the Warrens everything, including his pact with the devil and the curse he'd pronounced on his father. After hearing Maurice's story, the Warrens are convinced he is demon-possessed. A few days later, Nancy calls 911 in a panic. When officers arrive, they find Nancy visibly shaken. She warns the officers to be careful as they find Maurice sitting at the kitchen table, his beard covered in blood. He was unable to answer the officers' questions, and Nancy directed them to the bathroom, where they found the floor and bathtub smeared with blood. Nancy claimed she'd found Maurice lying on the floor in a terrifying state. His teeth were bared, and his face was contorted into a terrifying grimace. And he was spinning around and around like a top. Officers are convinced Maurice is having a mental breakdown, but Nancy pleads with them and explains she'd seen him fly across the room, pushed by unseen hands. She reports seeing his face contort and twist into something unrecognizable. She explains having seen Maurice in 2 places at once. She tells officers to call Father Beardsley, as he can corroborate her claims. One of the officers calls the priest, who informs him the Warrens are involved in the case. Despite their belief that Maurice was demon-possessed, the Catholic Church refuses to sanction an exorcism without a psychiatric evaluation. The psychiatrist interviews Maurice, but is unconvinced of demonic possession. Shortly after leaving the interview, Maurice cries out in pain and pulls up his shirt. There, burned into the flesh of his back, was an upside-down cross. On March 21st, 1985, the strange case of Maurice Theriault was reported in the Springfield Morning Union. Yet, despite the media coverage and increased pressure from Father Beardsley and the Warrens, the Catholic Church refuses to perform an exorcism. Bishop Harrington, the priest making the determination, instead offered a prayer for Maurice. What happens next is horrifying. As Bishop Harrington was praying, Maurice had a strong reaction. His forehead became swollen. His eyes changed. Objects began flying, and vases shatter. And for the first time, Maurice sees his doppelganger. Maurice's reflection looks like him, except it also doesn't. There's something about the eyes that just don't make sense. The next day, Nancy went out in search of her husband. She claimed to have seen him in the greenhouse, but when she called out to him, he looked over at her, his face twisted and sneering. She was staring at this thing that looked like Maurice, but wasn't. The push for an exorcism intensified, and despite their best efforts, Father Beardsley, Nancy, and the Warrens are turned away. One night, while Maurice and Nancy are saying their prayers before bed, she felt as if she was being choked. Except no one was actually choking her. She looked over at Maurice, who was sitting next to her. He was still there, staring intently at her and smiling. His hands were in his lap. Convinced time was running short, the Warrens reached out to a close friend, Bishop Robert McKenna, who agreed to perform an exorcism on Maurice on May 2, 1985. As Bishop McKenna began the exorcism, Maurice's eyes began to drip blood, and a loud banging noise is heard coming from somewhere upstairs. Then, Voices are heard coming from the kitchen, except no one was in there. Maurice's facial features changed dramatically, and crosses are reportedly burned into his hands. At some point during the exorcism, Bishop McKenna asked the demon to identify itself, to which it responded, "I am what I am. I am the only one." After this, Father McKenna prayed and waved a crucifix in front of Maurice's face. And then, just like that, Maurice came out of his trance. The demon was gone, and Maurice was back to normal. Until July 1985, when police discovered evidence that Maurice had been sexually abusing his stepdaughter. The young teenage girl had disclosed the abuse to her biological father and reported the abuse had lasted several years. But then she made a confounding claim. Quote, "According to the girl, it wasn't really Maurice who had raped her. No, she claimed it was somebody else who looked just like Maurice." End quote. She believed Maurice's doppelganger was responsible for raping her. Despite her disclosure, charges against Maurice were dropped, and all was seemingly well. In fact, Nancy and Maurice continue to live together as a married couple and build their business for 7 more years. On October 13th, 1992, Nancy filed a restraining order against Maurice and initiated a formal separation. A Palm Beach Post article dated November 15th, 1992, stated, quote, "The restraining order came after state human service officials removed 5 of the Theriault's grandchildren from the home after receiving reports that Frenchie had abused them. The couple also had 7 children from previous marriages." End quote. Nearly a month later, on November 4th, 1992, Maurice broke into Nancy's home with a shotgun. Once inside the home, he shot her in the arm. Then, he turned the gun on himself. The Palm Beach Post article stated, quote, "On election night, Nancy went out to play bingo. While she was gone, police said, Frenchie, armed with a 12-gauge shotgun, loaded with buckshot, broke into the house, cut the phone line, and waited. Nancy returned home shortly after 10 and was surprised when she found Frenchie inside. I said, 'You're not supposed to be here.' Then, he hit me in the head with the butt of the rifle. He started pounding her with his fists and knocked her over. She got up and ran outside, but he fired and hit her. He came out after me and dragged me back inside," she said. "He put me on the couch and said he was going to blow my head off. He picked up my arm and said, 'I guess I'll probably go to jail for this.'" As she sat there cowering, he told her he was going to blow his own head off instead, Nancy said. He said he didn't want me to forget it. He stuck the gun in his mouth and did it. End quote. The shooting left Nancy without a left arm and wounds in her chest and back. But thankfully, she survived. In 1982, Philippe Theriault committed a murder-suicide. And in 1992, 10 years later, Maurice Theriault committed attempted murder and died by suicide. In an eerie coincidence, the man who was determined to be nothing like his father turned out to be just like him. I'll admit, This story really gets under my skin. It's not just the true crime aspects, those are horrific enough. But the paranormal components really freaked me out. There are some who say Maurice's supposed possession was nothing more than a hoax. He made it all up. And that he was just a guy with a mean and violent streak. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. Did Maurice's pact with the devil lead to demonic possession? Or were his erratic and violent behaviors not caused by the devil, but by Maurice himself? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.